It looked like the perfect love story. A young couple, their van, and the open road. Behind the smiling photos and filtered sunsets, something darker was building, but somewhere between Utah and Wyoming, the dream ended, and the van came home with only one person inside. Before we dive deeper into this heartbreaking story, make sure you like, share, subscribe, and click the notification bell. It helps more people find these true stories that deserve to be told. In July 2021, 22-year-old Gabby Petito packed up a white Ford Transit van with her fiancé, Brian Laundrie, and set off from New York on what was supposed to be a 4-month road trip across America. They called it their van life adventure. Every stop was meant to be a new chapter. Utah, Colorado, Wyoming, each captured for Instagram, each moment edited to perfection. Gabby posted pictures of hiking trails, national parks, and handwritten journals. Her captions were filled with wanderlust. Friends described her as creative, gentle, and deeply in love with Brian. But to those who knew them well, there were signs that the journey wasn't as peaceful as it looked online. As they traveled west, tiny cracks began to show. Texts Gabby sent to her mother hinted at tension. She mentioned disagreements, stress, and that Brian sometimes lost his temper. Still, she reassured her family that everything was fine, that traveling together for months could make anyone irritable. By early August, they had reached Moab, Utah, a picturesque desert town known for its red cliffs and quiet charm. The couple stayed at a local campsite, exploring Arches National Park and documenting every moment. But behind the camera, things were unraveling. On August 12, 2021, a 911 call came into dispatch. A man reported seeing a couple fighting. A man slapping a woman near a white van with Florida plates. Police were sent to investigate. That call would later become one of the most haunting pieces of evidence in the case. When officers pulled them over, Gabby was in tears. Body cam footage would later show her trembling, apologizing repeatedly. Her face was red. Her voice cracked. She told the officer she had been struggling with anxiety. Brian, calm and detached, called it a minor disagreement. No arrests were made that day, and the couple was allowed to continue their trip after being separated for one night. But that moment, that single encounter, would become the turning point in a story that shocked the entire world. In just weeks, Gabby would vanish, and the van life dream that had inspired millions online would turn into a national nightmare. Where does love end and control begin? At what point does just a fight become something far more dangerous? The body cam footage begins with flashing red and blue lights cutting through the Utah desert. The camera shakes slightly as the officer approaches a white Ford Transit van parked along the highway. Inside are Gabby Petito and Brian Laundrie, the couple whose story would soon capture the world's attention. Gabby's face is streaked with tears. Her voice trembles as she tries to explain what happened. She says she was fighting with Brian, that she hit him first, that she has bad OCD, and gets anxious when things aren't perfect. She takes all the blame. Meanwhile, Brian stands beside the van, calm, collected, even joking at times with the officers. He says Gabby had been working herself up, and that he was just trying to keep her from hurting herself. For more than an hour, the officers interview them separately. Gabby apologizes over and over. She admits she was upset. Brian downplays everything. The officers debate what to do. Domestic violence laws in Utah require someone to be cited if there's evidence of assault. One officer says he believes Gabby was the primary aggressor because she admitted to hitting Brian. But both insist they don't want to ruin anyone's lives. In the end, they decide to separate the couple for the night. Brian is given a ride to a hotel. Gabby stays with the van. She's left alone, crying on the roadside as the police car drives away. That was August 12, 2021, the last time law enforcement would see her alive. Later, investigators and the public would study that footage frame by frame. Experts pointed out subtle signs of emotional abuse. Gabby's tendency to take the blame, her visible distress, and Brian's detached demeanor. Domestic violence advocates said it was a textbook example of coercive control, where the victim internalizes fear and guilt so deeply, it becomes invisible even to police. For a brief moment that night, She had been within reach of help. But help slipped away. In the days that followed, Gabby posted smiling photos from Arches National Park, laughing in front of Red Rock Canyons. To anyone scrolling online, it looked like the couple had moved on from that argument. But behind the smiles, the cracks were deepening. Friends later said Gabby sounded off in her texts. Something about her tone had changed. Shorter replies, fewer emojis, less warmth. She was trying to keep the peace. He was trying to stay in control. And the van kept moving west. What do you think? Could the officers have done more that night? Or was the tragedy already written in the silence between them? After the police stop in Moab, Gabby and Brian reunited the next morning and continued their journey west. From the outside, it seemed like they'd patched things up. They smiled for photos, shared playful videos on social media, and posted about life on the road. But underneath, something had shifted. On August 17th, Brian flew home to Florida for a few days. His parents later said he went back to empty a storage unit and save money. Those few days apart could have been a moment to breathe, a pause from the growing tension. But when he returned to Utah on August 23rd, the tone of their trip seemed different. Gabby was quieter online. Her usual energy faded. Between August 24th and 25th, the couple was spotted leaving a hotel in Salt Lake City and driving toward Grand Teton National Park in Wyoming. That same day, Gabby called her mother, Nicole Schmidt, for the last time. She said they were heading into Yellowstone next. Her mom said she sounded happy, but tired, nothing alarming. Then, communication changed. Gabby's last Instagram post went up on August 25th, a photo of her standing in front of a mural of butterflies in Ogden, Utah. Something about the caption felt unusual. It read simply, "Happy Halloween." The date and the tone didn't match her usual style. Her friends later said it didn't sound like her voice at all. The next day, Gabby's mother received a strange text message from her daughter's phone. "Can you help Stan? I just keep getting his voicemails and missed calls." Stan was Gabby's grandfather, but her mom said Gabby never referred to him by his first name. That single message sent a chill down her spine. Something felt off. Meanwhile, witnesses later reported seeing Gabby and Brian at a restaurant in Jackson Hole, Wyoming on August 27th. Staff at the Merry Piglets claimed the couple had a loud argument. Gabby in tears, Brian storming out, then returning to continue the fight. That would be the last known sighting of Gabby Petito alive. 2 days later, the van was seen parked near the Spread Creek dispersed camping area. Travelers passing by captured it on their dashcam. The same van, the same Florida plates, eerily still and silent. When the footage later surfaced online, viewers noticed what appeared to be sandals and a hat lying outside the back doors. The van's doors partially closed, as if someone had been there just moments before. Days later, Brian Laundrie returned home alone to Florida. No Gabby, no explanation, just the van parked in his driveway, cleaned inside and out. Her family's calls went unanswered. Their messages turned blue, delivered, but never read. At what point does absence become a confession? And what would make a man drive home 2,300 miles without the woman he claimed to love? On September 1st, 2021, the white Ford Transit van pulled quietly into Northport, Florida. It was the same van that had carried Gabby Petito and Brian Laundrie across the country, the same one they turned into their tiny traveling home. Only this time, there was no laughter, no Instagram stories, no trace of Gabby, just Brian alone. Neighbors later recalled seeing him unloading camping gear. He mowed the lawn, went on walks with his mom, ordered pizza. It was as if nothing had happened. Inside the Laundrie home, the van sat in the driveway, cleaned, organized, and stripped of the chaos of travel. Gabby's belongings were still there, her clothes, her toiletries, her journal. But she wasn't. Back in New York, Gabby's parents were growing desperate. Days had passed with no contact, something completely out of character for their daughter. Gabby called her mom almost every day when she was on the road. Now silence. Nicole Schmidt, her mother, began calling Brian. Then his parents. No one answered. Texts went unread. Calls went straight to voicemail. The same family that had once welcomed Gabby into their home suddenly shut their doors. On September 11th, 10 days after Brian's return, Gabby's family finally reported her missing to police. That same evening, Northport police arrived at the Laundrie residence hoping for answers. They were met with a simple statement: Brian wasn't talking. His parents handed over their lawyer's contact information. That silence set off a firestorm. Within hours, news outlets picked up the story. Social media exploded. Thousands of people began analyzing Gabby's posts, her van, the Moab bodycam footage. Hashtags like #FindGabbyPetito flooded every platform. But as the internet searched, Brian stayed home, protected by his parents, shielded by legal advice. To the world, it looked suspicious. To Gabby's family, it was unbearable. The van had made it home. Gabby hadn't. And now, the man who could answer everything refused to say a word. Would you trust silence in a case like this? Or does silence speak louder than any confession? If you're following this story, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and click on the notification bell so you won't miss what happens next as the search for Gabby Petito begins. When the missing person report was filed on September 11th, 2021, the urgency was immediate. Gabby Petito, 22 years old, blonde hair, blue eyes, 5'5", had been missing for over 2 weeks by the time police entered her name into the national database. Every second mattered. That evening, Northport police officers knocked on the Laundrie family's door. The van sat in the driveway, its white paint glinting under the Florida sun. But when the officers asked to speak with Brian, they were told he wasn't available. His parents said he was resting and referred police to their attorney. The officers left with more questions than answers. Back in New York, Gabby's family was frantic. They hadn't heard her voice since late August. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Her location stopped updating. The last text from her number, the one mentioning Stan, replayed in her mother's mind again and again. She knew her daughter didn't send it. Meanwhile, online investigators began piecing together Gabby's last known movements using digital breadcrumbs. Her Instagram posts, YouTube vlogs, and witness accounts. A family of travel bloggers came forward with a crucial clue. Their dashcam footage from August 27th showed Gabby and Brian's white van parked along a dirt road near the Spread Creek dispersed camping area in Wyoming. The van's back doors were partially open, a detail that chilled viewers. It was the first real lead. Detectives from the FBI and local law enforcement began coordinating a massive search effort across Wyoming. Helicopters swept over forested terrain. Volunteers scoured hiking trails. The Petito family begged for information, pleading directly to the Laundries on national television. "We just want to know where Gabby is. Please tell us anything." But in Florida, the Laundrie house stayed quiet. Curtains drawn. No statements. No cooperation. Then, something unexpected. On September 14th, Brian's parents told police that their son had gone for a hike at Carlton Reserve, a sprawling nature area not far from their home. Days later, they claimed he hadn't returned. Suddenly, there were 2 missing persons, Gabby in the west, Brian in the east. Reporters filled the street outside their house. Protesters shouted from the sidewalk. "Where's Gabby?" became the question that echoed across the country. Behind the headlines, one detail lingered in investigators' minds. Why would a man whose fiancée was missing vanish himself? Was he running from guilt? Or was there another story buried beneath the one everyone thought they knew? If someone you loved disappeared, and the one person who might know the truth refused to speak, what would you do? By mid-September 2021, the search for Gabby Petito had become more than just a police investigation. It was a movement. Every corner of the internet seemed to be looking for her. TikTok, YouTube, Twitter, Reddit. Thousands of users became digital detectives, analyzing every photo, timestamp, and frame of video from Gabby and Brian's trip. Hashtags like #FindGabbyPetito racked up millions of views in just days. People were retracing her route, overlaying GPS data from travel vlogs, and comparing satellite images to locate the van. One breakthrough came from a family of travel vloggers known as Red, White, and Bethune. They had been recording their own road trip through Wyoming when their dashcam captured something eerie. A white van parked along a dirt road near Spread Creek dispersed camping area. When they reviewed the footage, the details were unmistakable. Florida plates, tan stripe, identical stickers. It was Gabby and Brian's van. Investigators immediately descended on the location. Drones and K-9 units searched the nearby forest and creek beds. The footage provided a narrow window. It showed the van parked there on August 27th. The same day witnesses saw the couple arguing in Jackson Hole. Meanwhile, on TikTok, a woman named Miranda Baker posted that she and her boyfriend had picked up Brian hitchhiking near Calter Bay Village on August 29th, just 2 days after Gabby was last seen alive. She said he offered her gas money, told her his fiancée was back at the van, and seemed anxious to get back to Florida. Those claims fueled speculation. If Brian was hitchhiking without Gabby, what had happened in the days between August 27th and 29th? At the same time, the Laundrie family's behavior continued to raise suspicion. Brian's parents refused interviews. Reporters watched them quietly load their camper for a short trip to a nearby campground. It was a move that baffled the public. Their son's fiancée was missing, yet they were going camping. For Gabby's parents, the silence was unbearable. They pleaded once more on national television, their voices breaking. "We're begging the Laundries. Please, just help us bring our daughter home." The FBI joined the search officially on September 17th, releasing a nationwide alert and searching Brian's house. Agents carried away evidence, including hard drives and the couple's van. Every clue, every online lead, every theory all pointed back to one question. Where was Gabby Petito? And if millions of strangers could find the van through a video online, what were the people closest to her hiding? If you had the chance to speak up and possibly save a life, would you stay silent? Or tell the world what you know? The sun was low over the Wyoming mountains when the search teams moved into the Spread Creek dispersed camping area. Days of scouring rivers, trails, and thick brush had brought nothing, until that afternoon. On September 19th, 2021, an FBI-led team discovered human remains in a remote clearing near where the van had been spotted. The site was quiet, the kind of silence that makes even seasoned investigators pause. A few personal items were scattered nearby: a camping tent, a sandal, and what looked like part of a journal. The coroner's office was called in immediately. Within hours, authorities confirmed what the world feared. The remains matched the description of Gabby Petito. The news spread across the country like wildfire. Millions had followed her story for weeks, refreshing updates, sharing clues, hoping for a miracle. But now the tone shifted. Hope turned into heartbreak. That evening, FBI Special Agent Charles Jones held a brief, somber press conference. Earlier today, human remains consistent with the description of Gabby Petito were discovered. Behind him, the wind whipped through the trees. Reporters stood silent. No questions could soften the truth. Back in New York, Gabby's family received the call no parent should ever get. Her father, Joseph Petito, posted a single message on Twitter, a photo of Gabby smiling at the beach with the caption, "She touched the world." Autopsy results released later confirmed the cause of death: homicide by manual strangulation and blunt force trauma. The coroner estimated she had died 3 to 4 weeks before the body was found, around the same time Brian Laundrie was seen hitchhiking alone. The case was no longer a missing person search. It was now a murder investigation. While the nation mourned, attention turned sharply toward one man, Brian Laundrie. He had refused to cooperate. He had vanished days earlier. And now, with Gabby confirmed dead, the pressure to find him intensified. Protesters gathered outside the Laundrie home night after night, holding signs that read, "Justice for Gabby." The quiet street in Northport, Florida, became a media circus. Helicopters overhead, news vans parked for blocks. Inside, the Laundries remained silent. Their lawyer released a brief statement of sympathy. But sympathy wasn't enough. People wanted answers. Who killed Gabby Petito? Where was Brian Laundrie? And why did her story resonate with millions who had never met her? When a love story ends in tragedy, can the truth still be found? Or does it disappear with the person who holds it? The official confirmation came on September 21st, 2021. The body found in Wyoming was indeed Gabby Petito. The coroner ruled her death a homicide, later specifying the cause as manual strangulation. The brutality of it broke hearts across the country. News outlets broadcast her smiling photos. The van, the national parks, the happy couple, side by side with headlines of her murder. For millions who had followed the story in real time, the contrast was unbearable. This wasn't just another case. It was personal. Within hours, the focus shifted from mourning to justice. The only person who could explain what happened, Brian Laundrie, was missing. According to his parents, Brian had gone hiking in Carlton Reserve on September 13th, just days before Gabby's body was found. They claimed he never came back. The reserve stretched over 25,000 acres of dense swampland filled with alligators, snakes, and thick undergrowth. It was the perfect place to vanish or to hide something. Law enforcement swarmed the area. Drones, ATVs, dive teams, and search dogs combed the terrain for weeks. But no trace of Brian surfaced. Meanwhile, every new revelation fueled outrage. The world couldn't understand how he had been allowed to walk away in the first place. Protesters lined the street outside the Laundrie home, chanting, "Where's Brian?" Neighbors said they heard shouting late into the night. Others left flowers and notes for Gabby at makeshift memorials across Northport. Inside their house, the Laundries stayed silent, speaking only through their attorney. To Gabby's family, it was cruelty disguised as legal strategy. They accused the Laundries of withholding information, of helping their son disappear. By the end of September, the FBI issued a federal arrest warrant, not for murder, but for unauthorized use of a debit card belonging to Gabby. It was a technical move, a way to gain leverage while building the case. But everyone knew what it really meant. Brian wasn't just missing. He was the prime suspect in Gabby's death. The story had now reached every corner of the world. People lit candles in her memory. Artists painted murals in her honor. And yet, somewhere out there, the man she trusted most was either running or gone. How does a relationship filled with love and adventure end in silence and death? What does it take to truly know the person beside you? If you're following this case, like, share, subscribe, and click on the notification bell, because in the next chapter, the hunt for Brian Laundrie takes a chilling new turn. In the days after Brian Laundrie disappeared, his parents' quiet Florida home became the center of the most watched mystery in America. Police cars idled out front. Reporters camped on the lawn. Protesters shouted from the street, holding signs that read, "Where's Gabby?" and "Tell the truth." Inside, Chris and Roberta Laundrie rarely emerged. Their blinds stayed shut, their voices never heard. Every statement came through their lawyer, short, measured, and emotionless. But their silence raised more questions than it answered. Investigators searched their property twice, collecting potential evidence from the camper parked in the driveway. They found Brian's car abandoned near Carlton Reserve, his wallet and cell phone left behind. According to his parents, he had gone hiking and never returned. But many didn't believe it. Neighbors recalled seeing the Laundries towing their camper out for a 3-day trip right after Brian returned home alone from Wyoming. That detail sent shockwaves through the media. If your son's fiancée was missing, would your first instinct really be to go camping? For Gabby's family, it felt like betrayal on top of heartbreak. Her father, Joseph Petito, spoke through tears and interviews. "Their son is home. Our daughter is not. They know something." Meanwhile, online sleuths pored over every photo and police report. The public's obsession had reached fever pitch. Every detail, from the van's contents to Brian's artwork on Pinterest, became a possible clue. Some theorized he was hiding in the Appalachian Mountains. Others believed his parents were secretly helping him escape. Police searched Carlton Reserve for weeks, battling heavy rain, floods, and alligators. Drones mapped every inch. K9 units sniffed through the mud. But the swamp gave up nothing. Then, another twist, the Laundries told police they were going to help search the area themselves. For weeks, they'd stayed silent. Now suddenly, they were ready to help? Many suspected it was a calculated move, a way to control what investigators might find. Public frustration was boiling over. Candlelight vigils were held for Gabby across multiple states. Her name became a symbol, not just for her tragedy, but for all the missing who didn't get this kind of attention. Still, one haunting truth remained. Gabby's story had an ending. Brian's didn't, not yet. When a suspect vanishes into thin air, do you believe it's luck or planning? By late September 2021, the search for Brian Laundrie had turned into one of the most extensive manhunts in recent American history. The FBI, U.S. Marshals, local law enforcement, and volunteers scoured miles of terrain across Florida's Carlton Reserve. But the swamp refused to give up its secrets. The reserve stretched over 25,000 acres, thick mangroves, chest-high water, snakes, and alligators. Even trained officers found it nearly impossible to navigate. Helicopters circled overhead, thermal drones scanned for heat signatures, and K-9 units pushed through the mud. Each day ended the same way, empty-handed. While search teams battled the wilderness, online investigators were waging a different kind of hunt. People across the country began posting alleged sightings of Brian. At gas stations, on hiking trails, even on surveillance cameras in small towns. Every report sparked waves of speculation. Most were false leads, but they showed how invested the public had become. Some believed Brian had fled into the Appalachian Trail, a place he was known to love. Former hikers who'd met him before described him as experienced enough to survive alone for weeks. Others thought he had help, that someone was feeding him, moving him between campsites, or even smuggling him out of state. Law enforcement dismissed most of the rumors but continued their ground search relentlessly. Meanwhile, FBI agents executed a search warrant on the Laundrie home, collecting hard drives, notebooks, and personal items. They also confirmed that Gabby's remains had been found near Spread Creek, and her death ruled a homicide. The warrant now officially tied Brian to the investigation. Despite mounting evidence, his parents insisted they had no idea where he was. Their attorney released a short statement. Chris and Roberta Laundrie do not know where Brian is. They are concerned for his well-being and hope the FBI can locate him. The words felt hollow to Gabby's family and to the millions following the case. Meanwhile, the hashtag Justice for Gabby movement flooded social media. True crime creators dissected every police report. Former detectives offered theories on podcasts. The case had become more than an investigation. It was a cultural moment, exposing both fascination and frustration with how justice unfolds. Weeks passed. No trace of Brian, but searchers kept going back into the reserve, retracing their steps, believing the answer might still be there, hidden beneath the murky water. What drives a person to run? Guilt, fear, or something even darker? And if the truth was buried out there in that swamp, how long could it really stay hidden? The search had gone on for more than a month. Over 50 law enforcement officers had combed Carlton Reserve, using helicopters, ATVs, and trained cadaver dogs. Still nothing, not a footprint, not a trace of Brian Laundrie. But on October 20th, 2021, everything changed. That morning, Brian's parents, Chris and Roberta Laundrie, contacted authorities and said they wanted to help search the area once more. For weeks, the swamp had been flooded and impassable, but now the water levels had receded. Detectives agreed to accompany them. They entered the reserve together, walking along a narrow trail Brian was known to frequent. Within a short distance, less than an hour into the search, they made a discovery that stunned everyone. First, a dry bag lying on the ground, then a backpack, and next to it, a notebook. Moments later, officers called for backup. Scattered nearby were human skeletal remains, partially submerged, decomposed, and consistent with the harsh environment. The search was over. The scene was immediately cordoned off. Forensic teams arrived to collect evidence. The notebook was carefully removed, damp but still legible in parts. Days later, dental records confirmed what investigators suspected. The remains belonged to Brian Laundrie. The public reaction was a mix of relief and frustration. Relief that the long, tense search had ended. Frustration because it ended without answers. For Gabby's family, there would be no courtroom, no trial, no confession, at least not from his own mouth. But one clue remained, the notebook. Inside, investigators discovered writings that appeared to be Brian's final thoughts. The FBI later revealed he had admitted to killing Gabby Petito, claiming he did it after she was injured during their trip and that he thought it was merciful. His words sparked outrage. Experts called it an attempt to rewrite the truth, to portray her murder as an act of compassion instead of control. Even in death, Brian Laundrie left behind more questions than closure. How did his parents lead investigators directly to his remains after weeks of failed searches? Why did they choose that day to help? And why were his belongings so conveniently placed in a previously scoured area? Online forums lit up with theories. Some believed the Laundries had known all along. Others thought Brian had ended his life early in the search, hidden by the thick swamp until the water receded. The FBI closed the case months later, officially naming Brian Laundrie responsible for Gabby's death. But to many, the story didn't end with that confirmation. It ended with a question mark. Do you believe Brian's notebook told the truth, or was it his final attempt to control the story, even from beyond the grave? The world waited for answers. After months of searching, all that remained of Brian Laundrie were a few bones, a backpack, and a water-damaged notebook. His final words written in shaky ink. When the FBI released excerpts from that notebook in January 2022, the story he told only deepened the mystery. Inside, Brian admitted to killing Gabby Petito, but his version painted a distorted picture of what happened in those final days. He claimed Gabby had been injured during their travels in Wyoming, that she was in extreme pain, and that he killed her out of mercy. The words read more like a confession wrapped in self-pity than an admission of guilt. He apologized to everyone this may concern, writing that he couldn't go on without her. He ended the entry with a single haunting sentence. I ended her life. I thought it was merciful. To investigators and to Gabby's family, it was anything but mercy. The coroner's report had already shown the truth. Manual strangulation and blunt force trauma. There was nothing merciful about that. Experts who reviewed the confession said it was a classic example of an abuser trying to rewrite the narrative, controlling the story even in death. Domestic violence advocates pointed out that Gabby's final days, captured through texts and witness accounts, reflected fear, manipulation, and psychological control. She was apologizing for existing, one expert said during a CNN interview. That's not a mutual argument. That's emotional abuse. For Gabby's parents, the notebook was not closure. It was a reminder of everything their daughter had endured and everything they had lost. Through their attorney, they released a statement. Brian Laundrie's words are not truth. They are his version of events, designed to protect himself even in death. Still, the public devoured every detail. The notebook's release reignited online theories about what really happened between August 27th, the day Gabby was last seen alive, and September 1st, when Brian returned home alone. Some questioned how he managed to drive over 2,000 miles, clean the van, and act normal while knowing Gabby was dead. Others asked whether his parents helped him cover it up. The FBI later confirmed that no other individuals were criminally charged. They concluded Brian acted alone. But to many, that conclusion felt incomplete. Too many gaps. Too much silence. What the notebook didn't explain was the why. Why did a road trip meant to celebrate love turn into a crime scene? Why did Gabby have to die in the wilderness while Brian drove home and lived freely for weeks afterward? In the end, his words provided no justice, only a glimpse into the mind of a man who took everything from a woman who simply wanted to see the world. If Gabby could have written her own ending, what do you think she would have said? If you believe her story deserves to be heard, like, share, subscribe, and click the notification bell, because what follows next is the fight for justice that didn't end with Brian Laundrie's death. After the FBI officially closed the criminal investigation, the silence that followed was deafening. No arrest, no trial, no chance for Gabby's parents to hear the truth from the one person who could have told it. The case had ended, but justice, at least in their eyes, had not. In early 2022, the Petito and Schmidt families turned their heartbreak into a mission. They created the Gabby Petito Foundation, dedicated to supporting victims of domestic violence and missing persons cases. Through donations and public speaking, They began shining a light on the very patterns of control and manipulation that had taken Gabby's life. But privately, grief lingered like a shadow. Gabby's mother, Nicole Schmidt, often spoke about the weight of waking up every day to reminders of her daughter, the texts she'd never receive, the calls that would never come. "I hear her laugh sometimes," she told one reporter softly. "Then I remember I can't call back." Meanwhile, attention shifted toward the Laundrie family. Their silence, their actions, and their timing during the search continued to draw scrutiny. Many questioned how Brian's parents had located his remains so quickly after weeks of failed searches. Some even wondered whether they had known more all along. In March 2022, the Petito family filed a civil lawsuit against Chris and Roberta Laundrie, accusing them of intentionally causing emotional distress. The suit alleged that while Gabby's family desperately searched for their daughter, the Laundries knew she was dead and refused to speak, even releasing public statements implying hope for her safe return. The lawsuit argued that this silence wasn't just cruel, it was deliberate. They showed no compassion, no remorse. The complaint read, "Their actions were outrageous and intolerable." The Laundries denied the claims, maintaining they followed their attorney's advice not to speak. But in the court of public opinion, that explanation rang hollow. For Gabby's family, the case had become about more than one tragedy. It was about accountability. Could silence in the face of suffering be considered complicity? As court proceedings continued, supporters gathered outside the courthouse wearing butterfly pins, a symbol of Gabby's spirit and her love for travel. They held signs reading "Justice for Gabby" and "Her voice matters." Through all the media noise, one truth remained constant. Gabby's story had changed something. It forced people to talk about emotional abuse, control, and how easy it is to mistake danger for love. But for every person who now knew Gabby's name, her family still carried the weight of everything they didn't know. If the people closest to a tragedy choose silence, can there ever truly be justice, or does truth die with them? When the FBI closed its final report on the Gabby Petito case in early 2022, the details were chilling. Not because they revealed anything supernatural or unexpected, but because they showed how technology had quietly recorded the truth all along. From GPS pings to text messages, every mile of that cross-country trip was mapped, logged, and timestamped. The FBI's digital forensics unit combed through Brian Laundrie's phone, laptop, and external drives, reconstructing his movements across state lines, his internet searches, and his final communications. What they uncovered painted a stark, undeniable timeline of deceit and escalation. Between August 27th and August 30th, investigators traced Brian's phone leaving the Spread Creek area, the same region where Gabby's body was later found. Location data showed stops in Jackson, Wyoming, and later a straight path heading east toward Florida. Along the route, he used Gabby's debit card multiple times, withdrawing cash and buying gas. It was this usage that led to the federal warrant for his arrest. Even more disturbing were the messages sent from Gabby's phone after she was already dead. The texts were robotic, short, and out of character, the kind that a mother instantly knows didn't come from her child. Investigators concluded those messages were likely sent by Brian to create the illusion that Gabby was still alive. They also found notes in his digital files reflecting obsessive behavior, searches about how to control emotional partners, and journal entries that oscillated between self-pity and resentment. Experts described them as the writings of someone deeply unstable, oscillating between guilt and justification. FBI reports confirmed that before returning home, Brian stopped at Grand Teton National Park for a brief time. Surveillance footage placed his van near an entrance checkpoint alone. He then drove across several states in less than 3 days, arriving in Florida on September 1st. What haunted investigators most was what he didn't do during that drive. No calls to 911, no messages to Gabby's parents, no signs of panic or remorse, just silence. Back home, digital evidence revealed he used his time methodically. He cleared out storage spaces, deleted files, and spent hours on social media watching news about the missing Gabby Petito case. It was as if he was tracking his own crime unfold. In the days that followed, he went camping with his parents, a detail confirmed by campground reservations and surveillance photos later included in the FBI's file. It was the calm before his own disappearance. The report ended with one final, haunting note. All evidence indicates Brian Laundrie was responsible for the death of Gabby Petito. It was simple, cold, final. But beneath that conclusion was a much larger truth. Without the digital trail, the story might have ended as just another mystery. In a world where every move leaves a digital footprint, does the truth ever really stay hidden, or does it just wait to be found? In the months after Gabby Petito's death, one question echoed louder than any other. Could it have been prevented? The question pointed straight back to August 12, 2021, in Moab, Utah, when Gabby and Brian were stopped by police after a 911 caller reported seeing a man slapping a woman near a white van. What seemed at the time like a minor domestic dispute had now become one of the most dissected police encounters in recent history. Body cam footage released to the public showed Gabby sobbing uncontrollably. Her voice cracked as she apologized again and again. "I was just cleaning," she said. "I was just trying to organize things." Brian stood a few feet away, arms folded calm, explaining that Gabby had been worked up and that he was trying to de-escalate. The officers decided not to make an arrest. They separated the couple for one night. Gabby kept the van, Brian went to a hotel, and both were told to relax and take a break. To the officers, the situation seemed under control. But the truth was far from it. After Gabby's death, experts in domestic violence intervention reviewed that footage frame by frame. Their assessment was devastating. They pointed out the signs police missed: the visible marks on Gabby's face, her trembling hands, her frantic need to take blame for everything. One specialist described it bluntly: "You're watching a victim trying to protect her abuser." A state-commissioned investigation later found that Moab police made unintentional errors. The officers had not been adequately trained to recognize coercive control and emotional abuse. They could have cited Brian for assault or brought in crisis counselors, but instead treated the encounter as mutual conflict. A decision that, in hindsight, might have cost Gabby her life. The Moab Police Department later announced new domestic violence training protocols, ensuring officers could better recognize patterns of manipulation and fear. But for many, the changes came too late. The footage had already become a haunting symbol of missed opportunities, of how a cry for help can sound like an apology when no one knows how to listen. The tragedy also reignited a national conversation about how law enforcement handles domestic calls. Advocates pushed for mandatory trauma-informed response programs, arguing that many victims are killed within weeks of an initial police encounter. A chilling statistic that mirrored Gabby's timeline almost exactly. For Gabby's parents, watching that footage again was unbearable. They saw what the officers didn't: the exhaustion in her eyes, the silent plea for safety she couldn't put into words. "She was alive then," her father said quietly. "She just needed someone to see it." The encounter in Moab wasn't just a piece of evidence. It was a turning point, one that divided life and death by a single decision. How many more cries for help go unheard because they don't sound the way we expect them to? By 2023, the headlines had faded, but the battle for accountability had only intensified. The criminal case was over, but the fight for justice was far from done. The Petito and Schmidt families pressed forward with two major lawsuits, one against Brian Laundrie's parents and another against the Moab Police Department. Both suits centered on the same belief that Gabby's death could have been prevented, and that silence and negligence had allowed it to happen. In Florida, the emotional distress lawsuit against Chris and Roberta Laundrie became one of the most watched civil cases in the country. The filing alleged that the Laundries knew Gabby was dead even as her family publicly begged for help. Their attorney had released a statement on September 14, 2021, expressing hope that the search for Miss Petito is successful. To Gabby's parents, that wasn't empathy, it was cruelty. Their lawyer, Patrick Riley, told the court, they knew Gabby was never coming home. They knew she was gone, and they said nothing. The Laundrie's defense argued they had simply followed their attorney's advice not to speak. But to the public and to Gabby's grieving family, that explanation only reinforced the image of cold calculation. At the same time, in Utah, the lawsuit against the Moab Police Department gained momentum. The family's attorneys claimed that the officers failed to properly apply state domestic violence laws when they stopped Gabby and Brian in August 2021. They alleged that if Brian had been cited or detained, Gabby might still be alive. The city eventually announced a $3 million settlement, not as an admission of guilt, but as a recognition of failure. The funds were directed toward the Gabby Petito Foundation to be used for domestic violence prevention and training programs. For Gabby's parents, the money didn't matter. What mattered was the acknowledgement that her death wasn't just an accident, but a consequence of inaction. Through court filings and interviews, the Laundrie's image grew increasingly tarnished. Each new detail fueled anger, from their camping trip after Brian returned alone, to the day they guided police directly to his remains. Even after the notebook confession, many wondered, how much did they know, and when? Despite the lawsuits, Gabby's family continued their advocacy work, traveling across the country to speak at shelters, universities, and police departments. They shared her story not as a cautionary tale of social media perfection, but as a lesson about recognizing red flags early and never ignoring intuition. Justice, for them, wasn't about punishment. It was about prevention. How do you measure justice when the person responsible is gone, in money, in policy, or in the stories that change how we see warning signs? If you're following Gabby's story, like, share, subscribe, and click on the notification bell, because what comes next is how her family turned loss into lasting change. After the lawsuits, the cameras slowly turned away. But for Gabby Petito's family, their mission was only beginning. They had lost a daughter, a sister, a friend, but they refused to let her memory end with tragedy. In late 2021, they founded the Gabby Petito Foundation, an organization dedicated to supporting families of missing persons and survivors of domestic violence. What started as a small idea in the wake of unthinkable loss soon grew into a national movement. Gabby's stepfather, Jim Schmidt, described their vision simply, "We can't save Gabby, but maybe we can save the next one." The foundation began funding search operations, partnering with nonprofits to provide rapid response resources for families with missing loved ones. They also helped create domestic violence education programs in schools and police departments across the U.S., teaching officers to recognize emotional manipulation and early warning signs, the ones that were missed in Moab. At public events, Gabby's parents spoke with raw honesty. They didn't stand behind podiums as polished advocates. They spoke as grieving parents. Her mother, Nicole Schmidt, often wore a small butterfly pin, a symbol of transformation and the same motif Gabby loved to paint. "When I see one," she said, "I think she's nearby." Each talk began with a photo of Gabby, smiling, wind in her hair, eyes bright with life. And every time the message was the same: awareness saves lives. They launched the hashtag #BeKindLikeGabby initiative, encouraging small acts of compassion and mindfulness in relationships. What started as a social media trend soon turned into outreach programs in high schools and colleges. Survivors began sharing their own stories using the hashtag, proof that even in death, Gabby was still helping others find their voice. The foundation also funded domestic violence hotlines and sponsored grants for missing persons units. Their reach extended beyond the U.S., with families from Canada, the UK, and Australia reaching out for advice and support. But advocacy came with its own emotional toll. In interviews, Gabby's father admitted, "Every time I speak about her, I relive it." Yet he never stopped. The pain had become purpose. Their mission wasn't only about remembrance, it was about reform. They wanted stronger intervention laws, better police training, and equal media coverage for all missing people, regardless of race or background. The movement that had begun with one young woman's disappearance was now reshaping how America talked about domestic violence and the stories it chooses to see. For millions who followed Gabby's story, her name had become synonymous with awareness. A reminder that behind every perfect photo might be a hidden cry for help. Grief may have taken her family's world apart, but love made them rebuild it into something that could protect others. If you lost someone to violence but had the power to turn their story into change, would you carry that burden or try to forget? As the search for Gabby Petito unfolded in 2021, the story became more than just a case. It became a mirror. For weeks, her face dominated every screen. Cable news ran 24-hour coverage. Talk shows dissected every new lead. True crime forums overflowed with theories, maps, and timelines. Gabby's name had become a household word. But alongside the sympathy, a different conversation began to grow. One about who gets found and who doesn't. Critics began using a term that resurfaced from past discussions: missing white woman syndrome. It described the disproportionate media attention given to missing young, white, middle-class women compared to the many people of color, men, women, and children, who vanish each year with barely a mention. In the weeks following Gabby's disappearance, journalists and advocates pointed out the glaring imbalance. News outlets across the country began publishing side-by-side statistics. Over 700 indigenous people had gone missing in Wyoming alone in the past decade, and most cases received little to no coverage. The difference was impossible to ignore. Cable networks aired debates about why Gabby's story resonated so deeply. Some said it was the accessibility of her social media, the images, the van, the couple's perfect aesthetic. Others argued it was the nation's bias toward stories that looked familiar and relatable to a certain demographic. Yet, even within the criticism, there was nuance. Many advocates who pushed for equal coverage insisted their point wasn't to take away from Gabby's tragedy, but to use it as a wake-up call. As one indigenous activist put it, "We're not saying stop caring about Gabby. We're saying care about all of them." Gabby's family acknowledged this truth as well. Her father publicly stated, "If our story brings awareness to others, then Gabby's name will stand for something bigger." The Gabby Petito Foundation later pledged to use part of its resources to help underreported missing person cases, focusing on marginalized communities. Still, the discussion exposed uncomfortable realities, not just about media bias, but about empathy itself. Why do some faces stay on TV while others vanish without a trace? Why do certain stories spark action, while others fade into silence? Social media, for all its flaws, had become both a tool and a mirror. It amplified Gabby's story, but it also forced the world to confront how many others never get that chance. Hashtags like #MMIW, missing and murdered indigenous women, and #EveryMissingPersonMatters began trending alongside #JusticeForGabby, uniting different stories under one call for awareness. In a way, Gabby's tragedy opened a door no one could close again. Her death revealed both the power and the privilege of visibility. Awareness can save lives, but it also asks a difficult question. Do we care about who's missing, or only about who reminds us of ourselves? The story of Gabby Petito didn't just unfold in the news. It was built, piece by piece, on the internet. For the first time in modern true crime history, millions of ordinary people played a part in investigating a real, unfolding case. The internet became both a magnifying glass and a megaphone. When Gabby was first reported missing in September 2021, the traditional process, press conferences, police bulletins, missing posters, wasn't enough. It was the viral wave of hashtags, live streams, and social media videos that turned her story into a global search effort. TikTok creators began analyzing her Instagram captions, timestamps on photos, and location tags. Reddit users mapped possible routes and compared weather conditions to verify where she might have been last. YouTubers reviewed hours of dashcam footage from travelers, hoping for a glimpse of the white van. And then someone actually found it. The Red, White, and Bethune family, travel vloggers documenting their own van life trip, discovered footage from August 27th that showed Gabby and Brian's van parked near the Spread Creek dispersed camping area in Wyoming. That 20-second clip, posted to YouTube, became the key that broke the case open. Investigators used the coordinates from the video to locate Gabby's remains days later. It was a moment that redefined what collective awareness could do. The internet, so often criticized for misinformation, had helped solve a murder. But the power of the crowd also came with a darker side. Alongside genuine investigation came wild theories, false sightings, and harassment of innocent people. Some online sleuths accused random hikers, neighbors, and even Gabby's own friends of involvement, based on nothing but speculation. The FBI later warned the public about the dangers of vigilante investigation, reminding everyone that digital curiosity could easily cross into obstruction. Still, the case proved one undeniable truth. Social media had changed law enforcement forever. Tips now came from hashtags. Clues surfaced in comments. Eyewitnesses uploaded proof to TikTok before police could even arrive on scene. The Gabby Petito case became a blueprint for how viral attention could mobilize people faster than any official bulletin. For Gabby's family, the online movement was both painful and powerful. They watched strangers across the world dedicate hours to finding her. And while the internet couldn't save her life, it helped uncover the truth of what happened to her. In a world connected by screens, empathy had gone digital. Millions who had never met Gabby felt as if they had lost someone they knew. Her case showed that justice can sometimes begin with a post, a video, or a stranger refusing to scroll past. But it also raised a haunting question. When tragedy becomes viral, do we honor the victim or consume them? By the time the FBI closed its final report, the name Gabby Petito had become more than a headline. It had become a symbol, one that forced millions to confront uncomfortable truths about love, control, and silence. Her story was not just about a young woman who vanished on a road trip. It was about everything we missed along the way. The body cam footage that showed fear mistaken for guilt, the silence that followed her disappearance, and the moments when help was just one question away. Advocates called Gabby's case a turning point in how we talk about domestic violence. It wasn't the traditional image of danger, no black eyes, no police reports, no restraining orders. It was quiet manipulation. Apologies that came too easily. Control disguised as care. Those who watched the footage saw it clearly. The way she took the blame for everything, the way she cried while he stayed calm. It was a pattern too many victims know by heart. Gabby's mother said it best. If this could happen to Gabby, it could happen to anyone. That truth shook the world. It showed how easily emotional abuse hides behind smiles, hashtags, and travel photos. The lessons stretched beyond relationships. Police departments across the country began revising their domestic violence response protocols. Training programs now include recognizing coercive control, understanding how victims often protect their abusers out of fear, and why silence doesn't mean safety. The Gabby Petito Foundation continued to fund awareness campaigns and emergency support programs for survivors. Her family's grief became a movement that turned tragedy into education, and education into prevention. Online, her story changed how people consume true crime. Many creators vowed to treat victims with empathy, not exploitation. Listeners began asking harder questions. Not just what happened, but why did no one stop it? But for every lesson learned, one truth remains the hardest to face. Awareness doesn't erase loss. The Petito and Schmidt families still wake up to an empty space that no justice, no reform, no foundation can fill. What they built came from love, but it also came from pain. A pain they live with every day. Gabby's story taught the world to pay attention. Not to perfection, but to the quiet cracks beneath it. The smiles that hide fear. The laughter that sounds rehearsed. The apologies that come too quickly. Because sometimes, the difference between life and tragedy isn't who you love. It's whether the world is listening when you whisper for help. What's the one thing you think the world should learn from Gabby Petito's story? If this story moved you, like, share, subscribe, and click the notification bell. Because the final chapters explore how Gabby's legacy continues to change laws, hearts, and lives around the world. After Gabby's name became a global headline, something unexpected happened. People began to notice who wasn't being talked about. Across the United States, families with missing loved ones started reaching out to reporters, advocates, and even the Petito Foundation. Many had been searching for years with no national coverage, no FBI involvement, no viral hashtags. For them, Gabby's story was a painful reminder of what it takes to be seen. In Wyoming alone, the same state where Gabby was found, more than 700 indigenous people had been reported missing between 2011 and 2020. Few of their names ever made the news. Some families said they struggled to get law enforcement to take their cases seriously. Others said they didn't even have photos good enough for a missing person flyer because no media outlet had ever asked for one. The comparison wasn't meant to diminish Gabby's tragedy. It was meant to highlight a system that prioritizes certain stories while neglecting others. Journalists began referring to this pattern as the visibility gap. After Gabby's death, that gap started to narrow slowly, but noticeably. The Gabby Petito Foundation began using its platform to spotlight missing person cases from marginalized groups. They shared stories on social media, helped fund search efforts, and even provided media training for families who didn't know how to navigate public attention. At one conference, Gabby's father stood beside a mother of a missing Indigenous teen from Montana and said, "We're not here because our stories are the same. We're here because pain is universal." His words drew tears from the audience. Advocates across the country called for legislative reform, including new alert systems, specialized missing person databases, and dedicated media partnerships for underrepresented victims. States like Wyoming, Utah, and New Mexico began launching task forces to address these disparities, many directly citing the awareness impact of the Petito case. The ripple effect was undeniable. Gabby's name had become both a warning and a bridge, a reminder that empathy shouldn't depend on race, gender, or how photogenic someone's Instagram might look. Still, progress was slow. For every case that gained traction, dozens more remained unsolved, unheard, and unseen. Families continued to beg for attention, often using social media the same way Gabby's supporters once did, tagging, posting, and hoping someone would care enough to share. Her story had opened a door, but it was up to the world to keep it open. Because justice isn't measured by how many people watch, it's measured by how many we refuse to forget. How many names never trend simply because no one's looking for them. What began as one family's nightmare eventually reshaped how an entire nation thought about missing persons, domestic violence, and accountability. Gabby Petito's death didn't just spark outrage, it inspired reform. In the months following the investigation, lawmakers across several states introduced new policies directly linked to the awareness created by her case. Utah, where Gabby and Brian had their now infamous police encounter, became one of the first to act. The state launched mandatory domestic violence response training for all law enforcement officers, emphasizing how to recognize emotional abuse, manipulation, and signs of coercive control. Lessons written in hindsight but rooted in her story. Other states followed. New York, Gabby's home state, introduced the Gabby Petito Foundation grant program, providing funding to organizations that support victims of domestic abuse and families of missing persons. Florida, where the Laundries lived, expanded its missing persons reporting system to improve coordination between agencies and social media platforms, acknowledging how digital visibility had accelerated Gabby's search. At the federal level, discussions about Gabby's law gained momentum. Proposed legislation aimed at creating a unified national database for missing persons, one that included marginalized groups often left out of traditional reporting. While not yet passed, the proposal marked a shift. Gabby's name had become shorthand for reform. Meanwhile, the Gabby Petito Foundation continued pushing awareness beyond policy. They partnered with shelters, nonprofits, and advocacy centers to provide real-world resources, from safety planning guides to emergency grants for domestic violence survivors trying to leave dangerous relationships. Their outreach efforts extended to universities, where workshops taught students how to recognize early red flags in dating dynamics. Every small step was a ripple from one tragic story, proof that even loss can lead to life-saving change. But policy couldn't erase pain. Gabby's parents still carried the same ache every day. They spoke openly about the emptiness of milestones, birthdays, holidays, family gatherings. Yet, through it all, they chose purpose over despair. Her mother once said, "I can't bring her back, but I can make sure someone else's daughter comes home." And that, in many ways, became Gabby's true legacy. Not just a case solved, but a movement sustained. The world learned that awareness is only powerful when it leads to action, and that sometimes the most lasting justice is found in prevention, not punishment. What law or change do you believe could save more lives like Gabby's? Faded. Years had passed since the day the world first learned Gabby Petito's name. But for her family, Time never softened the loss. It only gave it shape. They learned to live with the silence, the empty seat at the table, the birthday candles left unlit. Yet, through the pain, they found purpose. Publicly, they stood strong, a symbol of resilience in the face of unimaginable heartbreak. Privately, they still broke down, still cried when a song reminded them of her laugh, or when a butterfly landed nearby. "It's like she's telling us to keep going," her mother once said in an interview. The Gabby Petito Foundation had grown far beyond what they imagined in the beginning. What started as a small nonprofit had become a network of partnerships stretching across the country. They worked with shelters, created early intervention programs for young couples, and provided grants to families searching for their missing loved ones. Each new initiative carried a piece of Gabby's story, a reminder that tragedy can become transformation. But grief is never one-dimensional. For Gabby's father, the hardest part wasn't the media frenzy or the lawsuits. It was knowing how ordinary the moments were that led to her death. The arguments, the apologies, the fear she hid behind smiles. "People think it takes something dramatic," he said, "but sometimes it's just slow erosion, and by the time you see it, it's too late." The family's advocacy began focusing not just on response, but prevention. They started pushing for early education about relationship red flags, mental health resources, and public awareness campaigns about controlling behaviors often mistaken for love. Their message was clear. If someone starts shrinking to fit another person's comfort, that's not love, that's danger disguised as devotion. At vigils held across the U.S., strangers gathered holding candles, photos, and butterfly lanterns. Some came because they'd followed the story. Others came because they'd lived it. Survivors began to tell their own stories at these gatherings, about partners who isolated them, silenced them, or made them question their worth, and how Gabby's story gave them the courage to leave. Each person who stood up to speak was proof that her legacy had become more than awareness. It had become action. For Gabby's family, that was the only kind of peace they could accept. Not justice through punishment, but justice through prevention. And though no amount of advocacy could erase the ache, they took comfort in knowing that somewhere, someone was alive because they had heard Gabby's story and recognized themselves in her silence. Even in death, she was still saving lives. If your story could prevent someone else's tragedy, would you tell it, even if it broke you every time you did? In the years since her death, Gabby Petito has become more than the face of a tragedy. She's become a symbol of awareness, compassion, and courage. Her story, though born from heartbreak, continues to save lives. Everywhere her name is spoken, in classrooms, on news panels, at vigils, people remember the young woman who loved adventure, painted butterflies, and dreamed of seeing the world. Those who knew her describe her as kind, creative, and full of light. But her legacy became something far greater than even she could have imagined. The Gabby Petito Foundation remains active today, funding shelters, training officers, and partnering with advocacy groups across the country. The foundation's butterfly logo, inspired by Gabby's own art, has become a quiet emblem of survival and transformation. It reminds people that even out of unimaginable loss, something beautiful can still emerge. Her mother, Nicole Schmidt, now speaks at universities and survivor conferences, sharing Gabby's story with honesty and strength. "I tell them she wasn't perfect," she said once, "but she was real, and that's why people saw themselves in her." Her father, Joseph Petito, works with local law enforcement agencies, urging them to treat every missing person with urgency, regardless of who they are. Their advocacy has reached far beyond the United States. International organizations now cite Gabby's case in training materials for police and domestic violence responders. Her name has become part of a global movement for empathy and equality in how missing persons are treated. Each year, on the anniversary of her disappearance, people gather in parks and beaches around the world to honor her memory. Candles are lit, butterflies are released, and for a moment, the world feels united, not in sadness, but in solidarity. What began as a tragedy became a movement. What began with one voice silenced created thousands more speaking out. The lesson isn't just about justice. It's about listening, paying attention to those quiet signs of fear that hide behind smiles, and understanding that love should never leave someone smaller than they were before. Gabby Petito's story changed laws, hearts, and headlines. But perhaps her greatest legacy is that it changed the way people see each other. Because now, when someone whispers, "I'm scared," more of us will stop, listen, and believe them. If you could speak to Gabby today, what would you thank her for? The awareness she brought, the lives she saved, or the strength she gave others to finally walk away? If Gabby's story touched your heart, please share, subscribe, and click the notification bell. So more stories like hers can remind the world that behind every headline is a human being who mattered.